My name's Daniel Williams. I'm 56 years old, and for most of my life, people saw me as just an ordinary high school teacher. Quiet, simple, predictable, and maybe they were right, at least on the surface. But behind that simple life, I was quietly building something no one saw coming. See, when you teach for 25 years, you learn two things: patience and the art of watching people without saying too much. And that patience? It turned into my greatest weapon when my own son's bride decided to humiliate me. It started the weekend of my son Ethan's wedding rehearsal dinner. The house was full. His fiance's family had flown in from California, all sharp suits, diamond bracelets, and polished smiles. They looked like they belonged in a magazine. Me? I wore my old gray suit, the one I'd bought 20 years ago when my wife, God rest her soul, was still alive. It didn't shine anymore, but it was clean and pressed. And for me, that was enough. I'd saved and worked my whole life for Ethan. After my wife passed, he was all I had left. I paid for his schooling, his car, his first apartment. Never complained, never asked for thanks. So when his fiancée, Madison, came along, I did what any father would do. I welcomed her. I told her I was happy to see Ethan finally smiling again. At least, that's what I thought I was doing. The first time Madison and I met, she looked me up and down like I was a piece of old furniture. She had one of those smiles that didn't reach her eyes. "Ethan's told me so much about you, Mr. Williams," she said, her voice sugar-coated. "It's really inspiring that you've stayed in teaching all these years. Most people would have wanted more by now." I smiled back, pretending I didn't notice the jab. "Well, teaching's more than a job for me," I said. "It's a life's work." She laughed softly, swirling her wine. "That's sweet." Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her, but he didn't say a word. That was my first warning sign. At the rehearsal dinner, things only got worse. Her father, a big man with slick back hair and a Rolex that could buy a car, asked me, "So, Daniel, what line of work are you in?" "I'm a teacher," I said simply. He raised his eyebrows. "Still, at your age?" Before I could answer, Madison chimed in with a smile. "Yeah, Dad, he's dedicated. He believes in shaping young minds, even if it doesn't exactly, pay much." A few people chuckled around the table. I just sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth. I wanted to believe she didn't mean harm, but the way she said it, the way her eyes glinted, it wasn't innocence. It was pride, arrogance. And then she said it, the sentence that would stick with me for the rest of my life. "Ethan and I were actually talking about how we'll probably have to take care of you when you retire," she said, laughing. Since teachers don't really have much saved up." The table went quiet. Ethan looked down, red creeping up his neck. I took a sip of water, held my breath, and smiled. "That's kind of you to think of, Madison. But don't worry, I'll be fine." Inside, though, something in me hardened. For 40 years, I'd been underestimated. People assumed teacher meant broke. They had no idea what discipline and compound interest can do over time. I'd spent decades saving, investing, real estate, index funds, a few quiet startups. I'd built my portfolio the same way I built my lessons, one careful step at a time. But Madison didn't know that. To her, I was just an old man in a cheap suit. The wedding day came. The venue looked like something out of a movie: crystal chandeliers, imported roses, a string quartet. I hadn't realized how much money Madison's family had put into it until I saw the guest list. 200 people. Most of them I didn't know. During the reception, I tried to stay out of the way, taking photos, greeting relatives, sipping water. But the moment came when I wished I'd stayed home. It was during the speeches. Madison stood with her glass raised, looking picture perfect in her designer gown. "I just want to thank everyone," she said sweetly, "especially my wonderful parents for giving us the wedding of our dreams. And of course, my husband Ethan, who's always been my rock." She turned to me with that same polished smile. "And to Ethan's dad, thank you for everything you've done as a teacher. Your hard work really shows in the way Ethan appreciates education." The room laughed politely. A few guests nodded. Then she added, "It's so heartwarming to know that money isn't everything. Some people choose simple lives for simpler happiness." That one landed like a punch. People smiled awkwardly. not sure if she was joking. But I knew exactly what she meant. Ethan didn't defend me. Not once. He just clinked her glass, smiled, and kissed her cheek. And right there, under the chandelier light, something in me shifted. I realized I didn't need to prove myself with words. I could show them who I really was, not with speeches, but with actions. So I waited. I stayed quiet through the night, through the laughter, through the fake compliments. And when the music faded and the guests left, I walked out into the cool night air and made a silent promise to myself. They wanted to see a broke teacher? Fine, I'd let them. But one day soon, they'd see what broke really looks like, when their world comes crashing down around them that a few months past. Ethan and Madison bought a house. Or rather, I bought it. I'd offered to help with the down payment, quietly, through a trust I'd set up years ago. Ethan didn't ask questions. He just thanked me and said they'd pay me back. They never did. I didn't mind at first. I wanted them to have a good start. But slowly, I began to see the cracks forming. Madison had expensive tastes, designer clothes, exotic vacations. Ethan was working long hours at his marketing job, trying to keep up. Every time I visited, she'd make little comments. "Oh, Daniel, you probably wouldn't like this restaurant. It's too pricey." Or, "We'll buy you a nice suit one day, so you don't have to wear that old thing." I smiled through it all, because I knew something they didn't. The house they were living in, the one they brag about to her family, it wasn't in Ethan's name. It was mine, and I had plans for it. I'd spent years quietly investing. A real estate company I'd started in the early 2000s, small properties I flipped, smart funds that grew faster than I expected. By the time I turned 55, my net worth had crossed $31 million. But I never told anyone, not even Ethan, because money changes people. And as I watched Madison flaunt her new life, her car, her jewelry, her endless posts about marrying up, I saw exactly what she'd become. So I decided to teach her and my son the kind of lesson no classroom could ever provide. It started with a letter, a polite, simple notice, addressed to the residents of 14 Willow Lane. It read, "Dear tenants, the property has been sold. The new owner requires vacant possession within 60 days. Please contact the management office for details." Madison called me the moment she read it. "Daniel, what the hell is this?" she snapped. "We live here." I kept my voice calm. "I know, Madison. The property's been sold. You'll need to make other arrangements." "You can't do that." "Ethan, tell him," she screamed. Ethan sounded lost. "Dad, what's going on? You own this place?" "Yes," I said, "and I just sold it." That silence, that few seconds where they didn't know what to say, that was the moment I knew they finally saw me. Not as a broke teacher, but as a man who'd built his own kingdom, brick by brick. "I thought you had nothing," Madison said quietly. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "Never mistake humility for weakness, Madison. Some of us just choose not to flash what we have." She didn't reply. The line went dead. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset. For the first time in years, I felt peace. I didn't ruin their lives. I just reminded them that respect is earned, not assumed. And as far as teaching goes, it might have been the most valuable lesson I ever gave. For a few days after that phone call, my house was quiet. Too quiet. I'd sit by the window every evening, coffee in hand, listening to the wind move through the trees. It's strange how peace can feel heavy when your heart's still bruised. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I just felt tired. Tired of giving, of being misunderstood, of seeing my son lose himself to someone else's pride. I kept thinking about Ethan as a little boy, the way he used to sit at the kitchen table, legs swinging, asking me to help with his math homework. He'd smile up at me when he got an answer right. Back then, I used to believe that the love between a father and son was unbreakable. But over the years, that bond got buried under expectations, distance, and Madison's influence. A week after the notice, Ethan showed up at my door. He didn't call first, just knocked. When I opened it, he stood there looking exhausted, his tie loosened, his face pale. "Dad, can we talk?" I nodded and stepped aside. He walked in, glancing around the house as if seeing it for the first time. We sat at the old wooden table, the same one his mother used to polish every Sunday. Madison's furious, he said quietly. She thinks you're doing this to punish us. I sighed. It's not punishment, son. It's perspective. He frowned. Perspective? Yes, I said. You both needed to see what happens when you treat people like stepping stones. You've been living in comfort you didn't earn, mocking the very values that built it. He rubbed his face, silent. Then, after a long pause, he said, I didn't know you owned the house. That's the point, I replied softly. You never asked. He looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. Why didn't you tell me, Dad? About the money, the investments, everything. I leaned back, taking a deep breath. Because it wasn't about the money, Ethan. It never was. I wanted you to live without expecting handouts. I wanted you to build your own pride, not borrow mine. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. I messed up, didn't I? I smiled sadly. We all do. But it's what we learn from it that matters. For a while, we just sat there. No anger, no shouting. Just a long silence that said everything words couldn't. Then Ethan asked, so what happens now? I hesitated. You'll need to move out once the sale finalizes. But there's more you don't know yet. He looked at me, confused. What do you mean? I pulled out a folder from my drawer and slid it across the table. Inside were documents, property deeds, investment summaries, and a small envelope with his name written on it. He opened it, eyes scanning the paper. A check. $500,000, he whispered. It's yours, I said. Not as a gift. As a chance. Start something real. Something that isn't built on someone else's wealth or approval. He stared at the check for a long time, then at me. Dad, I don't deserve this. I nodded. Maybe not yet, but you can earn it. For the first time in years, he hugged me. It wasn't a quick, polite hug. It was the kind that said, I finally understand. When he left, I felt something lift off my shoulders. For all the pain Madison had caused, maybe she'd given me something too, a reason to reach my son again. But Madison wasn't done. 2 days later, I got a call from her mother. A sharp, nasal voice greeted me. Mr. Williams, this is Victoria Hayes. I'm Madison's mother. We need to discuss your recent actions. I could almost hear the diamonds clinking through the phone. She went on, You've humiliated my daughter. She's been crying for days. Selling the house was cruel and unnecessary. Surely a man of your age should have more dignity. I smiled. Dignity? Mrs. Hayes, I've lived my whole life with it. Maybe you should remind your daughter what it looks like. She gasped. Excuse me. I continued calmly. And since we're discussing truth, perhaps you should tell your daughter the real story of your so-called fortune. There was silence. What do you mean? She stammered. I said slowly, that the background checks I ran before approving the house transfer showed some interesting numbers. Your family isn't as wealthy as Madison likes to pretend. More silence. Then the line clicked off. See, I hadn't meant to dig into their finances at first. But after Madison's comments, I wanted to understand who exactly my son was marrying into. Turns out, their California empire was nothing more than leased luxury cars, rented houses, and credit debt disguised as wealth. They'd been living image first for years. Madison didn't know that I'd quietly bought the property her parents lived in, too, through an investment firm. She was mocking me while paying rent to a company I owned. Life has a funny sense of irony. 2 weeks later, Madison came by herself. She looked different, tired, makeup smudged, wearing plain jeans and a jacket instead of her usual designer outfits. Mr. Williams, she said softly, standing on my porch. I came to apologize. I didn't say anything. I just nodded for her to sit. She took a deep breath. I was wrong about you. About everything. I grew up thinking money was proof of worth. My parents taught me that image mattered more than character. I thought Ethan deserved better than a teacher father. Her voice cracked. But when you sold a house, and I realized everything we had was borrowed, it hit me how little we'd actually built. I listened quietly. There was pain in her voice, the kind that comes from her pride finally breaking. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just needed to tell you. I am sorry. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Madison, I said gently, you're not the first person to mistake silence for weakness. But if you truly want to make things right, start by helping Ethan rebuild. Don't chase comfort. Chase character. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Before she left, I handed her something, a small notebook. It was my wife's. Inside, she'd written her lessons about life, love, and humility. Little quotes she used to keep on the fridge. Your mother-in-law wrote that. I told her. She believed that wealth doesn't define people. Kindness does. Maybe her words can teach you what mine couldn't. Madison held the notebook like it was something sacred. Thank you, she whispered. And for the first time, I saw sincerity in her eyes. Months passed. Ethan and Madison moved into a smaller home, one they bought with their own savings this time. They started living simply, budgeting, working together instead of showing off. Every now and then, Ethan would call and tell me about their progress, how they were paying off debts, how Madison had started volunteering at a local school, helping with literacy programs. Funny, isn't it? The woman who once mocked me for being a teacher was now reading to children at a public library every weekend. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learned what real wealth looks like. One spring afternoon, I visited them. Their new house was modest. Small garden, old wooden fence, a swing hanging from a tree branch. Madison was in the yard, hands covered in dirt, planting flowers. When she saw me, she smiled. Mr. Williams, or should I say Dad? She said playfully. I chuckled. Daniel's fine. Ethan came out carrying lemonade. Dad, come sit. We sat under the tree, the sun warm on our faces. You know, Ethan said, Madison's been talking about starting a teaching course. So she wants to work with kids. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. Madison blushed. Guess I finally understand what you meant about shaping minds. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Good, I said. Because the world needs more people who teach, not just talk. That evening, as I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened. How one moment of disrespect had led to the greatest transformation of my son's life. I realized then that revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's about building perspective, tearing down pride to rebuild respect. My quiet plan hadn't been about humiliating Madison or Ethan. It was about reminding them, and maybe myself, that wealth without wisdom is just noise. A few months later, Ethan invited me to dinner. When I arrived, there were candles on the table, homemade pasta, soft music playing. Madison greeted me with a hug. Dinner's on me tonight, she said, smiling. We talked, laughed, shared stories. And at the end of the night, Ethan stood and said, Dad, there's something I want to tell you. Madison squeezed his hand. We're expecting. I froze for a moment, then felt tears sting my eyes. You are having a baby? Ethan nodded, grinning. You're going to be a grandpa. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in a long while. Maybe this was life's way of giving me a second chance, not just as a father, but as a teacher again. Over the next months, I helped them set up the nursery. Madison painted, Ethan built the crib, and I read old children's books out loud, just to hear the sound of laughter fill their home again. When their baby girl was born, they named her Grace, after my late wife. The first time I held her, I felt something shift deep inside me. All the pain, all the resentment, all the loneliness melted away. Grace looked up at me with tiny eyes that reminded me so much of her grandmother. And in that moment, I knew my story had come full circle. Now, when I sit by my fire in the evenings, I often think about that journey, about how people measure success, cars, houses, titles. But the truth? Success is watching your family learn what truly matters. If I've learned anything in this long, strange life, it's this. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy respect. And sometimes, the richest thing you can give your children is a lesson they'll never forget. So yes, maybe I was just a broke teacher once. But in the end, that broke teacher built something stronger than any fortune. He built character. He built legacy. He built family. And that, my friends, is worth more than $31 million any day.